We don't march and protest because we like to march and protest. All we want to do is be free.
Shaun King.
From New York, Shaun King. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. First and foremost, I wanted to thank all of our listeners for signing our petition at freerodneyreed.com and taking all of our action steps by making phone calls, sending emails, hosting events all over the country, and so much more. As you already know, on this past Friday, we had two major developments in the Rodney Reed case. I want to quickly break those down, tell you what's next. I want to respond to some criticisms, then change gears for a minute and talk about some upcoming elections. On this past Friday afternoon, the first bit of good news we received for Rodney Reed was that the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, a deeply conservative group, voted unanimously to recommend that the governor of Texas stop the execution of Rodney Reed. I have to pause here for a minute because over the past 48 hours, people have been saying on social media that they felt like they were duped into believing that Rodney Reed was innocent. Let me explain something. The Texas Board of Pardon and Paroles did not vote unanimously to stop the execution because they were swayed by hashtags or trending topics. They weren't duped. They voted unanimously to stop this execution because they actually looked at the evidence that was presented to them, and they knew that it couldn't go forward. They rarely make this recommendation, and that they recommended unanimously that it be stopped as a huge deal. At that point, the governor had the opportunity to either accept or deny the recommendation. The governor almost always accepts that recommendation. But before he could even respond, the Texas Criminal Court of Appeals, an all-white, all-male conservative group, voted to grant Rodney Reed an appeal. Again, this group was not duped. They looked at the evidence and issued a 5-page opinion on why they needed to cancel Rodney Reed's execution date so that new evidence could be examined and so that the court could properly determine if the prosecution, all the way back in 1998 when Rodney was convicted, actually broke the law when he was convicted because of what are called Brady violations. That's when the prosecution has evidence that could have exonerated Rodney Reed, but they hid that evidence to win their case. That's actually illegal and could get this conviction. If anything got this conviction overturned, it would be that. And there are at least 3 or 4 pieces of evidence that I've seen that it appears they knew all the way back in 1998, particularly around the fact that Rodney Reed was in a consenting relationship with Stacey Stites, who was killed. And it appears the prosecution was also aware that Stacey Stites was being abused by her boyfriend, and they hid that evidence. Either one of those pieces of evidence would have made it very difficult to convict Rodney Reed in 1998. And the prosecution wants to do everything they can do to make sure this conviction is not overturned because they'd never win if Rodney Reed was granted a new trial. We have to think Rodney Reed was literally scheduled to be executed tomorrow. And last week I was prepared to come on here today and do everything I could do to help us stop that execution, but I'm so glad it already happened. Now, I'm against the death penalty in general for so many reasons, but for those of us who've actually studied this case, and I have to say this, I've now read thousands of pages of source documents, police reports, affidavits, going all the way back to the 80s when Rodney was a student in high school. I've looked at all of the reports from medical experts. I've studied everything that Dr. Phil and the Innocence Project has looked at, and we actually believe that Rodney is innocent in this case. We believe strongly in it. And to be frank, I don't know that I ever would have adopted this cause as my own had the Innocence Project not been backing it. They are the most reputable, respected exoneration organization in the country. Now, people want to speculate and say that Rodney committed other crimes before this crime or after this crime. But here's what I know. He was never convicted of anything. And people are literally just doing 5-minute Google searches and acting like they're private investigators. But here's the thing. If Rodney is actually innocent in this case, and some of the leading medical experts in the world say that it's medically, scientifically impossible that Rodney had anything to do with this, he's innocent in this case that he's on death row for, it means that he was framed by the police and prosecutors. And for me, and I can just speak for myself here, if they're going to frame a man for a murder and allow a man to go to death row for a crime they know he didn't commit, I don't trust anything they have to say. It's as easy and simple as that for me. Rodney Reed has openly said that he wants them to take him to trial on any other charges or rumors that they keep bringing up, and they refuse to do it. And they refuse to give any of that evidence to the Innocence Project. They've even told the Innocence Project that most of the evidence in those cases has been lost or destroyed. I'm not buying it. I spoke to the Innocence Project yesterday, and they told me something that was simultaneously encouraging and discouraging. They told me that literally every person that they've ever helped to exonerate, that's now 367 people that were found fully guilty of horrible crimes, sexual assault and murder. They told me, they said, Shaun, every person we ever exonerated was called a monster, was called an animal. They told me that they were always blasted for even helping those people until it was proven that they were completely innocent. And then all of those critics just disappeared. I'm going to keep on fighting for Rodney Reed. I'll keep us posted on updates. I knew what I was getting into when I helped take on this case. But it's going to be a few months, I believe, before his case is reviewed by the courts. It could happen tomorrow if they chose to, but generally it takes a few months before a case is up for review. Just quickly as I close, I want to switch gears for a second and get us back to something I've talked about here on the air before. Of course, I want to beat Donald Trump, and we need to beat Donald Trump. But listen, I don't know if anything is more important than flipping the Senate out of conservative control. Because if we beat Trump or not, there's virtually nothing that we'll ever get done if we don't flip the Senate. But all of the nation is talking about impeachment, or we're talking about the presidential race. And if we don't pivot some of our energy and some of our attention to these Senate races, we won't stand a chance. That's why I hope that you can go to howweflipthesenate.com, check out what we're trying to do all over the country, see how you can help. You can sign up to volunteer. We now have offices and operations in 20 different states, but we're literally less than 90 days away from our first primaries for the Senate and for the Democratic presidential primaries. It's going to be right up on us very soon. I got to run. I'm going to keep giving us updates on Rodney Reed, and I'll give us some more updates on these Senate elections in the days ahead. Our guy, Mike Espy, just announced that he's definitely running in Mississippi, and that's one of the races that I really hope to get involved in. Mike's a great guy and did better than any Democratic Senate candidate has ever done in generations, and so we'll be backing him for sure.
That's
Take
historic.
Care, everybody.
That really is historic. If he becomes the representative for the state of Mississippi in the United States Senate. Shaun, with
go ahead.
With the Rodney Reed case, 120 days, is that what we're looking at?
No.
Okay.
It had the governor granted what the Texas Board of Pardon and Paroles requested, it would have been 120 days. But once the Texas Criminal Court of Appeals canceled the execution date, it could be months or years at this point. Rodney no longer has an execution date. It just depends on how long the appeals process takes and whether or not he's granted a new trial. So it could be 120 days, but it could be longer than that. Theoretically, it could be shorter, too.
Gotcha.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, take care, y'all.
Take it easy, Shaun.
All right, Shaun King.